Well, like you, I've watched and listened to the debate. I took down some notes. I have them here in front of me, as a matter of fact, sitting beside my letter from the RCMP. So it's interesting when I sort of go through this list. I think the first thing that I thought was I couldn't really hear a huge difference in some ways between Carney and Pierre. It was almost like Carney had taken a lot of Pierre's speaking points, and that's what it felt like over the last few weeks as Carney has gotten involved in this campaign. It seemed like he was using a lot of the talking points that Pierre used. Basically, he was going to solve all the problems that were created. I think one of the things that stuck out in my mind as I went through this, listened to it, was how many times they talked about a crisis. So it started off, and there was, I think, an opioid crisis was maybe one of the first ones, the opioid crisis, and how we're going to deal with that. And then that left us to the fentanyl sort of crisis. Let's suffice it to say we've got a drug crisis, because those two were discussed. And then the next thing, we were talking about sort of a gun crisis that kind of popped in there, and then the crime crisis. So they kind of went together. We're still really not sure where the guns are coming from. We believe a lot of farmers are committing crimes with their 1916 Lee Enfield. So there was the gun crisis, of course, and then that kind of led to the housing crisis. That was talked about for a little while, the housing crisis. And then the cost crisis. Sure, everything's expensive, gotten so expensive in the last 10 years, you can hardly afford groceries. So that crisis was talked about. Then we talked about climate change. That was, we got to talk about the climate change crisis. So that popped up on the radar. Who's doing the most to deal with climate change? Who doesn't care about the planet? Can you imagine there's a group of people that don't care about it? Well, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but nonetheless. And then I think from there we went to the healthcare crisis. So we don't want to leave that without. Let's put the healthcare crisis in there. And one that I will admit that I believe there is a crisis in, and that was sort of the international crisis, what's going on in Gaza and in Ukraine. So fair enough, crisis there. I'll check that one and say, yes, I do agree. And then, of course, we had immigration crisis. That sort of popped up. What do you support? That sort of idea. But it was just one crisis after another. And then all the way through, of course, Carney was using the Trump crisis as the one that's caused all the problem. Now, of course, everybody's concerned about a crisis. Absolutely. Hence the word. It's a crisis. But I think what scares me the most is another liberal crisis, because a lot of this was caused by 10 years of a liberal government. Let's face it. You can blame it on Donald Trump if you want, but it's 10 years of mismanagement by the liberal government. That's what all these crises amount to, is 10 years of mismanagement by a liberal government. So what I'm afraid of is the next crisis. The next crisis could be, if we're not careful, the Carney crisis. And that's what he's looking for. That's the big ringer, the Carney crisis. So do the right thing. Think back over the last 10 years and ask yourself, has things gotten better for you personally? Because that's what it's all about. How do you deal with it on a daily basis? Put all this crisis stuff aside and just ask yourself that simple question. Am I better off today than I was, let's say, 10 years ago? And that might not be an easy question for everybody to answer, but think through it and then make the right decision. And in my mind, as the undecided Canadian, I'd have to say the right decision is a vote for PC and a vote for Pierre Poilievre. How's that for ending the crisis? Let's end the crisis with a vote for Pierre Poilievre. Have a good one out there.